Linda Lunsford was supposed to pick up her daughters after work on Boxing Day, 1996. That never happened. Sometime after clocking out that morning, Linda vanished without a trace. As they began investigating the case, the authorities had their eye on someone close to Linda. Last person to see her alive. However, they needed more than a hunch to solve this case. They needed hard proof. Sadly for Linda's family, it would be 25 years before they got what they needed to convict the person responsible. On December 25, 1996, 38-year-old mother of 5 Linda Lunsford was working her evening shift. She worked at Walmart in the Village Marketplace Shopping Center in Chesterfield County, Virginia. She was helping to make sure that the store was in order for the post-Christmas clearance sales that would be going on. At 8:30 a.m., Linda and co-worker John Howard had finished their shift. They were grabbing breakfast at a fast food restaurant not far from the store. The pair had dated previously and had an on-again, off-again relationship. John and Linda had started dating about 6 months prior before she ended up calling things off. Linda had grown close to John's children during their short time together. This meant she wanted to keep things amicable between them. Additionally, they worked together, and Linda did not want any awkwardness between them. After grabbing breakfast, she was supposed to swing past her mother's home and pick up her 3 daughters. However, Linda never arrived. As the hours went by, concern began to mount. Her mother wondered where else she could possibly be. Linda liked to keep to a carefully planned-out schedule. She had to, as she worked 3 jobs to ensure her children had everything they needed. If Linda was late for something, it would throw off her entire day. When family members went out to look for Linda, they made a worrying discovery. Her 1994 burgundy Nissan Sentra was parked in front of the Food Lion store in the Village Marketplace. It was locked, and there was no sign of Linda. Even though the car showed no signs of a struggle, her family was still concerned. That evening, Linda was reported missing to the Chesterfield police. They pressured the authorities to take immediate action. They explained that this was extremely out of character for the dedicated mother. The investigators pulled up the CCTV footage from Linda's place of work. They determined she had left of her own free will. Then their focus turned to John Howard. He was the last known person to have been with Linda that day. He was brought in for questioning and admitted to spending time with Linda that morning for breakfast. John's children, on the other hand, offered a different version of events. When they were questioned, the children told investigators they had seen Linda at their home that morning. This is not what John had told them. When confronted with the new information, John conveniently changed his story. John then claimed Linda had come over to his house to speak about their relationship. He wanted them to start seeing each other again, a feeling that Linda did not share. John insisted that Linda had driven away from his house that morning alive and well. The investigators felt John was not telling them the truth. Since no other major leads had presented themselves, they focused in on him. The investigators looked into his purchase history in the days before Linda's disappearance. They discovered John had purchased a trash can, lighter fluid, and duct tape. Sure, each of these items could have an innocent reason behind them, but considering the circumstances, they raised a few eyebrows. Feeling he was their main suspect, the Chesterfield police applied for a search warrant to examine his home. When it was granted, they looked through every inch of John's residence. They looked for any signs of foul play. There was nothing new found during this search other than the curious fact that John could not explain to the investigators where the items he bought ended up. Even though they had not found anything, the investigators working to find Linda still felt that John had something to do with her disappearance. But a gut feeling means nothing in a court of law. They needed proof, and despite trying every avenue, they just could not find any evidence that tied him or anyone to the case. Months passed with no future sightings of Linda, and gradually the case grew cold. In early May 2021, after years of false hope and frustration, the Chesterfield police had an update in the Linda Lunsford case. All those years later, they finally believed they had enough evidence to link 62-year-old John Howard to Linda's disappearance. He was arrested on May 17th. He pleaded not guilty, and the case went to trial in August 2022. During the trial, prosecutors played a video from an initial interview with a Chesterfield County Police Department CCPD detective and Howard. During the interview, Howard attested that his relationship with Linda was intense. At the time, he admitted to seeing her the day after Christmas, but said that she left his house alone and he never saw her again. The trial lasted a week before the jury returned with their verdict. They found John Howard guilty of taking the life of Linda Lunsford, even though her body was never found. Exactly what evidence the police had for the conviction is not publicly known. Matt Barlow worked with both Howard and Linda at Walmart while in between semesters as a college student. He hoped the conviction would bring closure to their loved ones. "I am a dad, so the emotions of a mom working to provide for her kids, she disappears. What are their lives like?" he said. "I know that would have had to be very traumatic and sad. Just the thought of what happened. Things run through your head." Barlow said he never met Linda's children, but that she spoke about them often. "You could tell she really loved her kids," he said. "I am just truly sorry that happened." Barlow described Linda as kind and outgoing, while he said that Howard was quiet and no nonsense. "I remember when he came back to work, and they said that Linda had disappeared or was missing, and that John was a potential person of interest. We were all shocked, just more shocked at the fact that one of our co-workers disappeared, and honestly, it felt scary. Even to this day, when I go into that store, there is not a time I do not think about her." Barlow said that there were rumors swirling when he worked at Walmart about what had happened to Linda and whether Howard was involved. Howard was in custody at Riverside Regional Jail awaiting sentencing. In November 2022, his attorney filed a motion to strike and set aside the August verdict. He argued that the evidence is insufficient to prove Linda Lunsford has passed away, and that the circumstantial evidence is insufficient to prove Howard had slain Linda Lunsford. 8 News legal analyst Russ Stone said the judge had a hearing on that and denied the defense's motion to strike. So that was the status of the case at this point. But there was still a twist to come. While awaiting sentencing, Howard passed away on February 7, 2023 at VCU Medical Center. His passing thereby concluded the case against him. On February 2nd, court documents showed that Howard's attorney filed a motion to continue sentencing, citing the defendant's health issues. According to attorney Greg Sheldon, Howard had been receiving treatment for cancer throughout the proceedings of this case. In response, a pre-sentence report and status hearing was set in Chesterfield Circuit Court for February 21st. But Howard passed away before reaching that court date. According to Lakeisha Johnson with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Both Howard's cause and manner of fatality are pending. His lawyer stated, most recently he suffered a fall at Riverside Regional Jail and, according to his daughter, fractured his orbital bone and several ribs and suffered 2 brain bleeds, resulting in 2 surgeries. For Linda's family, the news was devastating. While they did not care for Howard himself, his disappearance meant that he took with him the knowledge of where he disposed of Linda's body. The legal analyst Russ Stone also said, when you do not have a body, obviously, question number 1 is, can you really prove a cause of demise? And if you cannot, then it is hard to prove who was the actor that actually did that. In this case, ultimately, after many hearings and much consideration, the court still found that the jury's verdict should stand, but they are definitely unusual cases. There is no record of a motion being filed that could have included questioning Howard to determine the whereabouts of Linda's remains. Stone noted that could have been part of the defendant's sentencing. Her children never got a chance to properly grieve their mother and lay her to rest. Instead, they have to live with the unknowns of what happened during her final moments and where her remains lie today. Maybe one day someone will find something, and they will be able to bring their mom home. In the early morning hours of February 27, 1999, 17-year-old Michelle Bright had finished up enjoying an evening out. She was with friends celebrating a birthday. She was walking back home to her parents' house in New South Wales, Australia. But Michelle never made it home that night. The once quiet town of Gulgong found themselves thrust into a mystery. A mystery that would span 21 years until the truth of who had taken Michelle's life was revealed. A man who had slipped through the cracks. When Michelle asked her mother to attend a friend's 15th birthday party on the evening of February 26, 1999, she was happy to let her daughter go. Michelle had always been responsible. Also, their hometown of Gulgong was a safe, close-knit community with less than 2,000 residents. Michelle had a fun evening before the party drew to a close and everyone said their goodbyes. When Michelle walked out the door, it was well into the early morning hours of February 27th. Her friends likely believed they would catch up with Michelle at school soon, but that is not what happened. At some point during her walk home, 17-year-old Michelle Bright vanished into thin air. When her mother awoke that morning, she was shocked to find Michelle was not in her bed. The relevant authorities were contacted, and a desperate search began to locate her. Had she been intoxicated and potentially fallen, injuring herself? Maybe Michelle had chosen to spend the night with a friend instead of making the walk home. Everyone hoped there was an explanation for Michelle's sudden disappearance. She was last seen the previous morning at 12:45 a.m. by a friend who dropped her off in Main Street. But after a 3-day desperate search, everything came to a grinding halt. A horrific discovery was made. Lying in a patch of long grass along a railway track near Barney's Reef Road was the partially clothed body of Michelle Bright. She was found less than a kilometer from her home. The police followed up on thousands of leads without getting any closer to who was responsible for taking Michelle's life. The Minister for Police, Michael Daly, announced that the New South Wales government offered a reward of $500,000 to solve the case of Michelle. This is the second highest reward offered in NSW. Everyone in Gulgong was talking about the senseless act. The people were theorizing about who they thought was responsible. In such a small town, there was a distinct feeling of looking over your shoulder. The people would always wonder if the perpetrator was walking amongst them. For years, this feeling remained. Only decades later, it was revealed that the person responsible had slipped away quietly 2 weeks after Michelle was found. He moved from Gulgong to just outside Sydney. He believed he had gotten away with it. Michelle's case seemed like it was never going to come to a conclusion. Over the years, the investigators had 5 suspects that stood out to them. There was no concrete evidence tying them to Michelle, so there was little they could do. The case went cold. Those who knew and loved Michelle had to live with the thought that the perpetrator was out there, living their life without consequence. It was not until 2019 that a major development in the case occurred. A team of detectives were tasked with looking at Michelle's case. After re-examining everything at their disposal, they were able to narrow down that suspect list of 5 to 2 individuals, one of whom was a 50-year-old father of 4 children named Craig Henry Rumsby. He was previously a neighbor of the Bright family. Confident that he could be their man, an undercover police operation was launched to befriend Rumsby. It began in November 2019, when Rumsby met a group of individuals who he thought belonged to a gang. An elaborate story had been created that involved a mysterious higher-up called the Big Boss, a large sum of money to be made, and a dirty cop. But this was all a fabrication. For the next 8.5 months, Rumsby was involved in various acts on behalf of the gang. The members continued to stress how important loyalty was to them. It was March 2020 when the corrupt police detective came into the picture. While speaking with this undercover officer, Rumsby stated that authorities had tried to pin Michelle's slaying on him. 5 months went by as the group continued to further their relationship with Rumsby. Then, various members began calling him to alert Rumsby that the authorities were looking at him for some case. One of them stressed to Rumsby that we cannot do anything if there is heat on one of us, so this has to be fixed before anything goes ahead. On August 10, 2020, the reward was raised to $1 million. Rumsby commented on that appeal, posted to the NSW Police Force Facebook page, saying, "It is so sad they have not caught her perpetrator. Michelle was like a sister to me. I feel sorry for the family." Then, Rumsby was called to meet the boss. He told Rumsby that he was a suspect in 2 cases, and this attention was bringing heat to the family. And this is when the trap was set. The boss said to Rumsby, "If you are not honest with me, mate, I cannot help you, and the fallout of that is that unfortunately we cannot do any more work together." He initially feigned innocence, telling the boss that he knew nothing about the case. About 2 hours later, Rumsby was shown copies of police documents and records, including a photo of his red Ford Falcon. Not long after he moved in 1999, Rumsby was interviewed on the phone by police in relation to Michelle's case. The next day, the red Ford Falcon he owned at the time was destroyed by fire. In a soft but solemn tone, he began offering details to the boss as to how he took Michelle's life. He held his hand over her mouth until she stopped breathing. He said he left his neighbor's home at about 11 p.m. and drove to another friend's house before heading into Gulgong in his red Ford Falcon. He stopped at the post office hotel before dropping in at the commercial hotel to speak with the publican. He revealed he may have left there and walked in a certain direction, but claimed to have no further memory of what happened in relation to Michelle. The boss suggested it might help if his associates took Rumsby to Gulgong to jog his memory. Afterwards, they would take him to Mudgee, where a chartered plane would fly him to Ballina that night to hide out. Later that evening, while on Barney's Reef Road in Gulgong, Rumsby detailed dragging Michelle by her hands across the road into the scrub, so no one could find her body. He told the men he did not think he assaulted Michelle, but admitted he pulled her bra down. After he was done, Rumsby said he went home, had a shower, another beer, washed his clothes, and slept. The next day, Craig Rumsby was taken into custody. With the pandemic putting major strain on the court system, it was not until May 2023 that Rumsby was finally brought to trial. After 7 grueling weeks, he was found guilty by the jury. He was sentenced to 32 years imprisonment by Justice Robert Allen Hulme on August 7th. Craig Rumsby will not be eligible for parole for 24 years, meaning he will be 77 years old before he has a chance of getting out. Michelle's case was finally solved thanks to a team of intelligent and dedicated law enforcement officers. They were all committed to bringing her justice. He might have gotten to live 20 years without answering for what he did, but at least Craig Rumsby will likely spend the rest of his natural life behind bars where he belongs. In August 1986, 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian walked out of her Tacoma, Washington home. She hopped on her bicycle and left behind a note to her parents. She wanted to let them know she would be home by dinner time. Jennifer was last sighted at 6 p.m., 30 minutes before she said she would be home. After that, Jennifer was gone. An investigation was launched, and soon her case was thought to be tied to that of another girl. She had gone missing under similar circumstances. Years later, a shocking truth would be revealed that pushed the investigation in a new direction entirely. On August 4th, 1986, Jennifer hopped on her bike at 2:30 p.m. and rode off to get some needed training time. She had an upcoming bike tour of the San Juan Islands she was due to go on soon. Jennifer had a 5-mile loop planned through Point Defiance Park, an area she had cycled often in recent times. Numerous witnesses saw Jennifer at the park that afternoon. Nothing seemed amiss. The last confirmed sighting came in at 6 p.m., and then something happened. Something that made sure that Jennifer could not make it home by 6:30 p.m., like she had promised she would. When Jennifer still was not home by 8:30 p.m., her parents reported her missing. Point Defiance Park was searched thoroughly, as was the surrounding area, but they found no trace of Jennifer. Still, the search continued. Volunteers joined to try and make sense of what had happened that day. 3 weeks after she was last seen, the search came to a tragic end. On August 28th, a person was jogging through 5 Mile Drive, the same track Jennifer had been spotted on. The jogger noticed a foul odor along the path. A closer inspection revealed a body. When the police arrived on the scene, they confirmed the body belonged to Jennifer Bastian. Her bicycle was also found nearby. Jennifer was taken in for a forensic examination, where the coroner determined she had passed from asphyxia. This was no longer a missing persons investigation. There was a predator on the loose. 4.5 months before Jennifer disappeared, another little girl had gone missing. After finding Jennifer's body, the investigators working on her case began to consider the possibility that these cases were linked. When you look at the stark similarities, it is easy to see why. 12-year-old Michella Welch was last seen on March 26, 1986, in Puget Park in Tacoma, Washington. Michella, like Jennifer, had been out on her bike that day. She was accompanying her two younger sisters, one of whom was also on a bike, while the other was riding along on a skateboard. Once they reached the park, Michella's sisters scampered off to play. She decided to cycle home and make lunch for them all an hour later at 11 a.m. Michella made it back to the park and placed the packed lunch on one of the tables. Then she went off to find her sisters, who had gone to a store close to the park. They wanted to use the restroom. When the girls returned to the park, they found the lunch Michella had brought them, but their older sister was nowhere to be found. They continued to play a while longer, until around 2 p.m. Then, one of the girls noticed Michella's bike had been left along with hers. This sparked a pang of worry. If Michella was in the park, where was she? After being unable to find her, the girls went back home to alert their parents. At 3:10 p.m., police were at the park to search for Michella. Hours later, her body was found. She was less than half a mile from where her sisters had spent most of their time playing. It was clear whoever took her life was a violent, sick individual based on the injuries found. Swabs were taken, but in 1986, DNA forensics was in its early stages for criminal cases. It was little help at the time for finding who was responsible. The investigators working on Michella and Jennifer's cases felt they were looking for the same man. The similarities were too obvious for it to be a coincidence. Thousands of tips came flooding in, with each one being scrutinized. Unfortunately, none of them led anywhere. Months turned into years and the cases went cold. In 2006, the swabs taken from Michella were re-examined. A profile was developed. However, any hope that this would bring a conclusion to the 20-year-old case was crushed when no results came up across any databases. The next development came in 2013. An investigator looked into Jennifer's case. He requested that the swimsuit she was wearing that day must be tested for DNA. It had not been tested all those years ago since it was found around her ankle. Therefore, an assumption was made that there would not be any significant DNA from the perpetrator. But when tested, the swimsuit was found to contain bodily fluids from the perpetrator. Now it was time to compare the samples. What that test revealed shocked everyone who had been involved in the investigation. They were not looking for one perpetrator, they were looking for two. The DNA profiles found on Michella and Jennifer did not match. They now knew the investigations needed to be handled separately. The sample found on Jennifer's swimsuit was compared to the national database, but there were no matches. Going back through old records, the investigators working on Jennifer's case singled out a list of potential suspects. They wanted to take DNA samples from them. One of these men was Robert Washburn. In 2017, Robert was 60 years old and living in Illinois. When asked to provide a sample, Robert willingly agreed. Something that did not stick out as something a guilty person would do. But when they got the results, it turned out that Robert Washburn was exactly who they were looking for. He was responsible for what happened to Jennifer Bastian. Washburn was taken into custody and extradited back to Washington to face the charges. Back in 1986, Washburn was 29 years old. He worked as a mechanic for Boeing and lived just 9 blocks from Jennifer's family home. At some point, Washburn got married and moved away. He had a daughter and lived his life as a free man for the next 3 decades, never raising suspicions about his horrific past. To those who knew him, Washburn was simply the man who spent most of his time caring for his disabled daughter. Washburn's name had been on the original investigators' radar back in the early days of the investigation, but there was never anything solid enough to tie him to the case. At the time, he was one of many suspects they considered. With his trial date fast approaching, Washburn changed his initial not guilty plea to a plea of guilty to the charges laid against him. Washburn was sentenced to 26.5 years in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years served before he can be considered for parole. While he did not speak during the sentencing, a written statement was read out on his behalf. Part of it read, "I recognize there is little that my words can do to diminish the tremendous sense of pain and loss that this has caused many people." Patty Bastian, Jennifer's mother, described to the court how there is always a cloud of fear and foreboding for the family on nice summer days. "We continued to live and laugh and love, but in a much different way," she said. She also described how the crime changed the city. Kids stopped playing outside unsupervised, and walking to school became a logistical nightmare, she said. Jennifer's sister, Teresa Bastian, told the court that she had not taught her daughter how to ride a bike. "You made me an only child," she told Washburn. Thanks to DNA, Michella Welch also got some sort of justice in the end. A family tree was created for the perpetrator through DNA phenotyping. Through this, a link to two brothers, both possible suspects, was established. The pair lived in Tacoma around the time Michella disappeared. With that information, the police set out to get DNA samples from each of them. It was Gary Hartman who proved to be a match. He was charged with the offense and taken to trial in 2022. After being found guilty, Hartman broke down in tears and repeated, "I am so sorry." The then 70-year-old was sentenced to 26 years in prison. That leaves one thing fairly certain. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Michella's mother, Barbara Leonard, and younger sisters, Angela Velasquez and Nicole Eby, spoke in court about how her demise impacted their lives. Michella was a happy child. She was also trusting. Too trusting, Barbara said, adding that she has often wished to trade places with Michelle. This is the day Hartman faces the judge. I say lock him up and throw away the key. It will not bring her back, but justice will have been served. Nicole talked at length about having to grow up too soon, suffering from repeated nightmares after her sister's demise. She still struggles with putting up walls with other people, including her family, because she is afraid of losing more people she loves. She also said she forgives Hartman.